And joining me now is National Security Adviser Jake Sullivan. Welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks for having me, Kristen.
Well, thank you for being here, Jake. We have seen these emotional and wonderful scenes of families being reunited as the hostages have been returned. I know the administration has said that it is hopeful that Americans will be returned soon. Can you tell us, do you expect American hostages to be released today?
Well, Kristen, the initial hostage deal involves the release of women and children, and there are 3 Americans in that category, 2 women and 1 young child. And we have reason to believe that one of those Americans will be released today. But until we see her out safely from Gaza, in the hands of the authorities and ultimately in the hands of her family, then we won't be certain. But we have reason to believe that there will be one released today.
Are you talking about the little girl, 4-year-old Abigail Edan, who, of course, celebrated her birthday in captivity? Jake, is that the American you expect will be released today?
We are hopeful that Abigail will be released. We think it's long past time that this little girl who, just as you said, celebrated her 4th birthday is back home with her family. Of course, she tragically lost her parents in this vicious, brutal terrorist attack on October 7th, but back with other family members. I'm not in a position sitting here at this moment to confirm that, but I will tell you, Kristen, that this is unfolding as we speak, and hopefully, literally any hour now, we will know which of the Americans is out. We have a sense of who it is, but I just am not in a position to confirm it because we want to make sure that the release goes off as indicated, as we expect. And at that point, we'll be prepared to speak to it, quite joyfully speak to it.
I understand this is an incredibly fluid and sensitive situation, but so that our viewers understand, have you actually seen the list, Jake? And is there at least one American name on it? Are there more?
Well, I started by saying we have reason to believe, and I wouldn't be sitting here saying that if I wasn't confident. I'm not going to get into exactly what we've seen, but I will tell you that we are in extremely close touch, down to every possible detail, with both the Israelis and the Qataris, as well as with the Egyptians. So we feel very fully apprised of what is likely to unfold today, but we proceed with caution because we're dealing with a terrorist group here. So we can't be absolutely certain about what is going to happen until it happens. And so we will await the actual transfer of the hostages today, at which point we can all speak with greater definition to exactly what happened.
And so there are 2 other American hostages who you have said you would anticipate would be released as a part of this latest deal, and then 7 other Americans still being held. Jake, what can you tell us about the other 2 who you have signaled will be a part of this deal, and then the other 7 who are still being held in captivity, held hostage?
Well, Kristen, this is a great question. What we know is that there are 3 Americans who fall in the category of the first deal, that is 2 women and a child, as I said before. We know that those 3 have been missing, presumed hostages, but we have not gotten proof of life on any of them, and we do not know for certain that all 3 of them are still alive. That being said, we do believe, we are hopeful that there will be additional Americans released. And remember that there is another day to this deal, so we will see another list tomorrow. And then we are working with all sides on the possibility that this deal gets extended to additional hostages beyond the initial 50. That ultimately is up to Hamas. If Hamas is prepared to release additional hostages, Israel has indicated as part of this agreement that it is prepared for additional days and a pause to the fighting. And so the ball really is in Hamas's court in terms of its willingness to step forward and release additional hostages, including potentially releasing additional Americans.
And I do want to talk to you about potential next steps, but obviously the Red Cross was a part of this deal, being able to let them in to see the hostages. Have they been able to do that, Jake? And what have they been able to glean about the remaining hostages? Do you know whether the additional 7 Americans are alive, and the rest of the hostages, more than 100 now?
We don't have that information yet. As part of the agreement, as you just alluded to, by the end of the fourth day, that is by the end of tomorrow, we expect to have that information. But as I sit here this morning, I cannot confirm anything about the condition of the additional Americans being held there, as other countries and as Israel cannot confirm the condition of their citizen hostages. But it is part of the agreement that that be done by the Red Cross, and we expect that to be fulfilled.
Do you know the exact number of hostages that remain, Jake? And what other groups, in addition to Hamas, are holding them?
We've been very straight from the start, Kristen, as has Israel and as have other countries, that we do not know the exact number of hostages who are alive at this time being held in Gaza. And we won't know that until those hostages are physically in the hands of authorities and ultimately in the hands of their loved ones and their families. And so we have tried to be direct, straight, and candid about what we know and what we don't know. We also are aware that it's not just Hamas holding hostages. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another terrorist group that participated in the brutal massacre on October 7th, is holding some. And other groups who are not directly affiliated but have loose connections to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are also holding hostages. So part of the effort here is to ensure that all of those groups somehow get connected to a deal in which every last possible hostage in Gaza who is still alive gets turned back over and reunited with their families.
Jake, do you have any concern that the U.S. so publicly negotiating a hostage release sends a message that Americans are willing to negotiate with terrorists, even if indirectly, and that could ultimately put the lives of other Americans at risk on the world stage?
Look, we've been in the business since the beginning of the Biden administration, and President Biden has taken a leadership role in this, in taking steps to bring home Americans who are unjustly detained or being held hostage overseas. And we've been willing to make hard decisions to do that because, as the president said, he has no higher priority than to bring Americans home. When the United States had one policy or another, people were taking Americans hostage. So from our perspective, this isn't about precedent. It isn't about policy. It's about a simple principle. If there's an American citizen being held overseas, we are going to do everything in our power, using diplomacy, using influence, using leverage, to be able to get those people home safely to their families. That is the commitment of President Biden.
Israel has said that it would extend the pause in fighting for every day that 10 additional hostages are released. Is it your expectation at this time, Jake, based on your conversations, that this pause in fighting will be extended beyond 4 days?
I think it is certainly a possibility, and we would like to see that happen.
Is it likely,
As I said
Jake?
before,
Is it likely?
That's up to Hamas.
Is it likely, though?
Well, it's hard for me to handicap it's hard for me to handicap that, Kristen, because this is Hamas. Hamas is going to make the decision about whether they're prepared to release another 10 hostages. Israel's put its cards on the table. They're prepared to extend the pause in fighting. So the ball is in Hamas's court. Will Hamas step up and release an additional 10 hostages? If they won't, then they are the ones choosing to bring an end to the pause in fighting, not Israel. And that's something that we will watch very carefully. But President Biden has been on the phone just in the last 24 hours with the Emir of Qatar. He will be speaking today with the Prime Minister of Israel. So he's continuing to work this hour by hour to see if we can secure those additional days of pause and those additional hostages coming home to their families.
Jake, at what point does a pause become a ceasefire? And does that run the risk of allowing Hamas to retool and to reset itself to further attack Israel?
It's a great question, Kristen, because there is a tension here. Days of a pause in the fighting do give Hamas the opportunity to reset and, as you say, to retool. But the Israeli government has been prepared to accept that risk because of the benefit they're getting, which are these incredible images of people being reunited with their families, the humanity of it, the sense of accomplishment of that, and the possibility and promise that more and ultimately all of the hostages will come home. But it does give Hamas time to retool, and there's no denying that. That's the trade-off, the hard trade-off that Israel made in accepting this deal. From our perspective, every day that hostages are coming home is a good day. And so we would like to see as many days as possible where that is happening until ultimately every last one of the hostages is home.
Would you want to see the pause continue even after all of the hostages were released?
We have been clear from the beginning of this conflict that Israel has a right to defend itself against an active terrorist threat. And it's important to recognize this is an active terrorist threat. Hamas is continuing to fire rockets at Israel, and Hamas is continuing to threaten additional massacres of Israeli citizens for as long as they can possibly muster them. And so Israel does have a right to continue to go after these terrorists, and we will support them in that right. They also have a responsibility, as we've said from the beginning, to do so in a way that is consistent with the laws of war and that tries to protect civilians to the maximum extent. And we have talked to Israel about that as well. But let's not forget what Israel continues to face, an implacable terrorist foe bent on the destruction of the state of Israel, and it's going to have to continue to deal with that going forward.
Let me ask you about a recent op-ed by Senator Bernie Sanders, who says, quote, the indiscriminate bombing because of that has led to an untenable amount of civilian deaths. He is becoming a growing part of progressive lawmakers who are asking that aid to Israel be conditioned on a plan to mitigate civilian deaths. President Biden called this idea a, quote, worthwhile thought. So would the administration support that?
Well, in that answer, President Biden acknowledged the idea, but he went on to say that his approach, President Biden's approach, which was high-level private diplomacy, has actually generated results. It has generated the introduction of a substantial and growing amount of humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, the exit of thousands of foreign nationals, including American citizens, from Gaza, and the first pause in the fighting since the conflict began, and the release of the first of a set of hostages, 50 hostages. All of that has been the product of presidential engagement, private engagement, hard diplomacy. That's the course that President Biden set us on, and that is the course that is delivering results.
But Jake, just to be very clear, should we take his words that it would be a worthwhile thought to mean that the president is open to signing legislation that would provide aid to Israel that comes with conditions?
I thought the president really couldn't have been clearer when he answered the question. He acknowledged the idea, and then he said, but the way that I have conducted our diplomacy in this is what is actually producing results. That's what he's done so far, and that's what he's going to do.
Is he open to it?
Again, he is going to continue to focus on what is going to generate results. And as he said in the press conference quite clearly, and as you can see from the fact that for the last 2 days we've seen hostages released, the approach that he is taking, direct presidential diplomacy behind closed doors with the Israelis and with our Arab partners, that's what's generating the kinds of results that we're seeing right now. That's the course that he's on.
All right. National Security Adviser Jake Sullivan, thank you so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.